What is up, everybody? This is Lyle with No Hippie Trucking and Transportation, coming at you just enjoying another day off out here in colorful Colorado. So, been talking to a lot of people that have just got off their trainer's truck, that are on their own now, and a few people that are about to get out on their own, just about to complete TNT. And one thing I wanted to talk about in this was some of the most embarrassing moments that I've had being out on my own, especially once I first got out on my own. Now, you know what? You're going to have some super truckers out there that don't really have to go through much, but one of my philosophies is you can't skip the struggle. So I'm going to talk to you about some of my most embarrassing moments. And a lot of these came uh, pretty soon after I'd, got out on my own. And some of these were mechanical failures, and some of these were just, situations I put myself in. So let's talk about the mechanical failure I had. When I first got my Peterbilt, not the one I have now, but the first one I did the lease on, it was having some issues as far as the transmission goes, and there was nothing wrong with the transmission. Junior Honduras, if you want to get in here and start talking smack about Peterbilts, but it needed to get an update on it, and I didn't know that at the time. So anyway, I'm at a truck stop in somewhere in New York or New Jersey, and before I had a chance to get this system upgraded, it would throw all these transmission codes, and it would not allow you to go either in drive or reverse. So I'm in the middle of a backing maneuver at this truck stop, busy as hell. It's got to be like 4:45 in the afternoon, and in New Jersey, New York area, whatever it was, that might as well be like 9 o'clock p.m. because the place is getting packed. People are looking for their spots. I'm trying to back in, and as soon as I get lined up to back into this spot, my transmission throws that failure code. And I tried to back it in, it wouldn't move. Turned off the truck, let it sit a while, tried turning it back on, tried backing in, still wasn't turning on, or still wasn't backing up. So at this point, I'm like clogging up the lane, like the entire lane. So, I'm like sweating and everything. So I finally I don't know if this did it or not. Cycled the key like 4 or 5 times, turned it on. It finally allowed me to back into the spot. So that right there was an embarrassing moment. Now, one of the other embarrassing moments I had was at a receiver that I will probably never go back to. I think it was called MDV or MDC Landover. I think it's MDV. It's in Maryland. I think the M stands for Maryland, D stands for Delaware, V, Virginia. So MDV Landover. And it was I think it's a place that stores military food or something like that. But this place, if you've been there, extremely tight. It's one of those places where when you back in, you need to pull away from your spot, because if you stayed in front of your trailer, nobody else would be able to back around you. So it's that tight of a place. And I'm trying to back in, and I had everything lined up perfect, man. I mean, I was like, okay, we're going to back it in. It's going to be backed in, no pull-ups. So a yard dog was there, and I think he was, and I wasn't really taking that much time, but he was like, hey, man, if you want, I could pull this trailer out and you'll have more space. So I was like, all right, cool. So in hindsight, I probably should have just told him, let me just back it in, because I had everything lined up right. But once he did that, well, first of all, I had to pull forward, so that kind of messed up my spacing and everything. I had to pull forward for him to pull that trailer out, which is kind of what messed things up. But then when I backed in, I wasn't completely centered in the dock, and there was so little room to pull forward to adjust yourself that I spent like, I don't know how many pull-ups it took. Now, looking back on what I know now, the right thing would have been to just pull out of the spot, pull out left, reset up, and then back in. But I kept trying to get this thing in, which seemed like the easiest way. And if you've been backing up, either of these, no matter what kind of truck you have, after a while you're going to have, I forgot what they call it, your clutch is overheating or something like that. And it'll basically just shut you down. So at this point, my truck is shut down. I'm in the middle of this aisle again, and people are trying to either get to their spots or leave, and I'm sitting out here with the truck that's not moving. That right there probably was the most embarrassed I've been out in a truck. So, I had another backing situation when I'd first kind of got out there. And this one really wasn't that complicated. There was a trailer that was in front of the spot I was trying to back in, and you either had a choice of blindsiding it, which is always the last option, or come in and do a U-turn, and a U-turn to the left, and then your trailer could get lined up to the spot that you're trying to back into. Well, rather than, what I should have done was pull really far forward, since I didn't have that room in front of me. But I thought I could just get it in, and I should have been able. Had that trailer not been there, I would have been able to get it in. But rather, once you start fighting with some of these spots a little bit, at some point, what I've learned, at least in my experience, is it's just time to reset and restart. But I kept trying to fight this thing in instead of starting over. And at this time, I still have all these people in these spots looking at me backing in and everything, and I'm like 100% embarrassed. And it was so bad to where the yard dog came out and basically told me what I should have known in the first place. He's like, man, you're approaching this all wrong. You should just pull forward, get a little bit closer, and then just back in like a traditional alley dock. But sometimes, especially as new drivers, what we do is we think we get kind of stuck in whatever maneuver we're trying to do rather than restarting from scratch. So that's one thing that I've learned out here is it's sometimes better to restart or reset a back than try to fight with what you have, even if you're almost squarely in that dock. So that was another embarrassing situation. And another one that kind of goes along with that, and I've kind of changed this. When I first started, I'd like to get lined up in the dock, then pull forward, open up my doors, and then back in. And I still will do that if there's obviously enough room to pull up from that spot and open my doors. But there was one of these places that was a little iffy, and I backed in, opened up, tried to open up doors. There wasn't enough room because there wasn't enough room up front. So I ended up pulling out of the spot. Nowadays, obviously, the same way you pull in would be the same way you back, or pull out would be the same way you back in. You almost don't need to turn the steering wheel, but I, for some reason, overcomplicated things again and had, a bunch of people there looking at me and all this kind of stuff. So this is just put out there for you guys that are just getting out there. Listen, you're going to get put in situations, even as maybe experienced drivers. I've seen experienced drivers with long-nosed Pete's get out there and embarrass themselves. So, you live to fight another day. These people aren't going to remember you, 45 minutes after this stuff is all over with. But it certainly is embarrassing when you're going through it. And there's two things that have made me a better backer. Two things. One, having that shit on the side of my truck. No hippie trucking and transportation. That right there, when you're backing in and people can easily identify that truck, and not that everybody knows who I am, but you know what I mean. your name's on the side of the truck. You got to be all you can be when you're backing that truck in. So that makes me hyper vigilant about how I'm backing things in. And then number two, and this would apply, I think, to more people, is when I first got this, well, it happened to my first Peterbilt too, but the airlines on the back of these Peterbilts, if you don't have have everything set up right, if you make that hard right, like a lot of people like to use that, I'm going to do the hard right and then do the snake method and then do a straight back in. Well, if you're pulling hard right, at least in the two Peterbilts I had, because I hadn't got things set up correctly with where I had the thing attached to the coil, it puts a lot of stress on your airline. So in my first Peterbilt, it actually pulled out the electrical line, which is another thing to do. Get spare airlines, spare electrical lines, all that stuff. So if it does happen, you don't have to wait for roadside. But back to my point. Anyway, when I first got the Peterbilt I'm driving right now, I still hadn't had those airlines correctly set up right. And I was still putting a lot more tension on that, primarily the airline, if I was going to make the hard right to get into a dock. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm not making any hard rights anymore. So there's a couple different ways that this made me better. First of all, it made me approach every back like a regular back, not this easy, hard turn to the right and then snake and then straight back. So that gave me more repetitions at just regular backing, and it made me look at things a little bit more 3D. So instead of always looking at the easy route, I'm gonna make this hard right and do all this, sometimes if there is that room up front, I'll loop around, and instead of making the hard right, I'll make the hard left, and then I'll make my snake method. But more often than that, I will go ahead and just do a regular, not an alley dock, but more of your basic back into a dock. So that repetition has made things easier, because I'd say that 30% of your docks are going to be kind of those easy docks where you're able to take the easy way out. And since I wasn't comfortable with how my airline situation was set up, I ended up having to take a route that maybe wasn't the easiest route. And I think that in the long run has made me be a better backer. But one thing I want to tell you is, you're going to get out there, you're going to be embarrassed. Listen, don't be afraid to ask anybody for help. A lot of people take pride in helping somebody else out. And if you see somebody out there struggling, I try not to be the one that waits to the point where whoever's backing in that I'm seeing struggling is to the point where they're in that frustration mode. I'll go out there and try to help it as soon as I can identify they're going to be having problems with that spot, whether it's the spot's a tough spot, because some of these spots are just tough spots, or that they may just be new. I helped somebody. Actually, I backed somebody's truck in at a Meyer in, I think it was Lansing, Michigan, because I already knew he was beyond the point of frustration. He had too many people looking at him and things like that. And you know what? There's another time I got in a situation. Let's talk about that one. I was at the Walmart in Colton, California. Typically you're going to have enough space in front of these docks to back in, but I was pulling into a spot where one of these CR England day cab drivers was parked right in front of my spot, so it made it a pretty tight back. And he was, that truck was actually sticking out a little bit further than the other trucks in that row. Now, these days I might have waited a little bit longer to see if the guy was going to come out before I attempted the back, but I went ahead and tried the back, and I had, first mistake, I had my trailer in the sixth hole, which was creating a little bit too much swing. So when I was pulling in, I was having problems with the truck on my right. But an old school truck driver came out and he was like, listen, you're not going to be able to get this truck in the way it is now. He's like, you're going to need to back in with your tandems forward like they are now. But once you get that trailer going into the spot, you need to slide your tandems to the rear and then back in so you don't have that swing. So that was a pretty embarrassing. If you guys know that Walmart, that's a pretty busy Walmart. So luckily I didn't have my new truck, but still a lot of people looking at you, all that kind of stuff, you know, walking back and forth to get their bills, sitting in their trucks. And even through all that embarrassment, the tip I got out of that, slide my tandems to the rear, really helped me out a lot. And realizing that, you know what, just because you drove in with your tandems in a certain position doesn't mean that you need to keep them in that position. So a lot of times what I'll do, I mentioned in another video, is I will slide my tandems to the rear when I'm pulling into a shipper or receiver, just because in most cases it makes it a little bit easier to back. But for those of you guys that are getting out there, listen, you're not the only ones that have been embarrassed. You might have these super truckers out there acting like, you know, they came out the womb backing things in with no pull-ups or anything like that. Listen, everybody has gone through this. You can't skip the struggle. Anyway, thanks for stopping by No Hippie Trucking and Transportation. I appreciate it. Comment, subscribe, and I'm out.